Welcome to my 200th episode. That means I'm wrapping up the 4th year run of Tales from Korea, and as per usual, this episode is a compilation of my favorite stories from the past 1 year. Of course, this year's milestone was that the channel finally tipped over that elusive 1,000 subs. Yay! It doesn't mean the performance of my videos anyway improved, but at least I could get the channel finally monetized. As tiny an achievement as it is, it wouldn't have been possible without my regular fans, and I'm deeply grateful for your continued support. Past 1 year included fairly diverse subjects as usual, from the usual ghost stories to glitch in the matrix, real-life crime, historic events, to some religious topics. I hope you enjoy this revisit. As always, handpicked, translated and narrated by yours truly, Anthony. It's a story from many years ago, when I was a reckless and foolish teenager. As soon as the summer vacation started, I went hiking to a mountain with my bestie. Like many teenage boys, we had some useless grand goal in our mind. In our case, it was going up all the mountains in the country before we graduated high school. Sometimes some of the friends asked to join our adventure, but usually they didn't ask second time because they could not keep up with us. My bestie was a friend from childhood, and we'd been out and about in the wild and mountains from early age. Once on the trail, we would fast walk all the way up till we reached the top. We weren't even properly equipped. Proper hiking boots and outdoor wear were unreachable luxury for poor teenagers, so we were just in our normal street attire and sneakers, and a backpack full of food. That summer, our first destination was Ode Mountain. This time, our goal wasn't just reaching the top, but also having a relaxing holiday by the water. After the first week of the vacation, started the extra summer classes, so that week was the only chance. Nowadays, every mountain valley, every inch of beach and riverbank would be crowded with holiday makers, but at the time, it wasn't still a norm to have a summer vacation. The mountain was relatively quiet, and we found a nice plot to camp facing Walljeong Temple across the stream. We decided to spend the first night there and hike to the top the following day. So, we had a quiet and relaxing evening, making simple meals and, well, sharing a bottle between us. Sun sets quickly in mountains, and as the dusk setting quickly, my bestie said he heard people chattering behind a bush in the distance. I didn't believe him at first. To reach that spot, one had to pass the ground we were occupying, and we didn't see a soul passing by since we set up our tent. But friend kept mentioning that there should be some people, probably 6-7 of them. He insisted to go around to find out. I was reluctant, but in the end followed him leading the way with a torch. And indeed, as we approached, I did hear people chatting and laughing, some guys and women. The bush was dense that we had to push them aside to pass through, but behind it was unexpectedly a small clearing. And there were sitting 3 women and 4 men around, drinking and giggling. They seemed a bit surprised by our intrusion, but soon they nonchalantly invited us to join, that everybody met in the mountain was friends. They turned out to be a group of uni students traveling together. I don't know what my friend was thinking, but he lied that we too were uni students. I dislike lies, but well, it was too late to take it back. After all, where else would I meet these people again, I thought. We ended up drinking quite a lot. The women were rather pretty, and as teenage boys with boiling hormones, we could not turn down their beat for toast one after another. Then my friend went around the bush saying he needed to pee. Left alone, I felt a bit self-conscious that they might notice that I was just a high school kid. But my bestie didn't come back after what felt like a significant length of time. I stood up saying that I'd go and look for him, and I felt the guy's faces going stiff. Did I do something wrong? I felt a bit of a chill from their reaction, but anyway headed off to our tent. Only then I realized how drunk I was. It was no surprise, as underage I was not used to such an amount of alcohol. I staggered to the tent, but my bestie wasn't there. I wondered, but I felt the world spinning around me and decided to lie down a while before searching for him again. He took the only torch too anyway. And of course, I dozed off soon. What woke me up was the murmurs of people outside the tent. My head was still spinning, so I just lied there listening. They were arguing over something.
"We should take them with us,"
a man said.
"That's not right. They're too young,"
a woman argued back. I could not think straight yet, and just wondered if guys were trying to do something to the girls. But why were they around my tent should they argue over whatever? I also wondered where my bestie should be. But I was too drunk, and my mind went on and off from one thought to the other. Were they still arguing? I should go and find my body. Oh, but just 5 minutes more. And soon I passed out again. What woke me up the next was the intense noise of downpour on the flimsy tent. My friend wasn't still there, and water was seeping into the tent already. I came out, and it was pitch dark all around. I panicked. All this rain, I could not see anything, and my friend was missing. The stream was swelling and getting wilder by seconds. All I could think was I had to find my bestie and to take the refugee at the temple with him. I ran behind a bush to find the uni students there, but however deep I walked into the bush, slipping and falling down, I seemed not being able to reach the clearing behind it. Had I gone mad or possessed by something? I gave up and turned back towards my tent. And there, somebody was standing. It was my friend. I had no mind to ask wherever he'd been. I grabbed his hand and said we had to cross the stream before we get too wild and go to the temple, that we could rescue the tent and our stuff later in the morning. But contrast to my haste, bestie was so calm, almost relaxed.
"No need to hurry. We can cross it just fine,"
he said. Had he gone nuts or still drunk, I wondered? His speech sounded somewhat sluggish. Then he produced a rope and said,
"Tie this up to your waist."
I noticed the other end of the rope was indeed tied to his waist.
"That way we won't miss each other, and can save the other should one of us slip and fall too,"
he said. I was so anxious to get away from there as soon as possible, so I just started tying it up around my waist. But I stopped short. Wherever did he get this rope in this rain and darkness? And why did he sound so weird? It couldn't be alcohol. My bestie was the best drinker I knew, and I had never seen him properly drunk. "We have no time for this. Let's just cross before too late," I urged. And friend suddenly lost temper.
"You have no idea how dangerous it is. Shut up and just tie it up."
I was alarmed, and only then noticed he was walking funny too. His trousers seemed all bumpy, as if he stuffed them with something. But with what? Pebbles? I didn't want to argue anymore, so just tied the rope around my waist, but with a single note so that I could untie it easily. It wasn't because of any logical plan, but simply a gut feeling, an instinctive alarm. As soon as I tied it up, Bestie perked up and started leading the way into the water. The water that came just about our ankle earlier in the day was already as high as our waist. It was difficult to keep the balance in the wildly swirling water. Taking every step forward was risky. But about half the way, friend stopped in the middle. I shouted what he was doing, at which he turned around. He was smiling at me. I could not see clearly in the rain and darkness, but I was pretty sure he was smiling. And he slowly sank under the water. And I, linked by the rope to him, too, started going under together. I quickly undid the knot while he disappeared completely into the water. I screamed and, I don't know how, but managed to cross the water. I ran to the temple, crying for help. Thank God, I saw some people approaching with a torchlight, and that's the last thing I remember. It was already morning when I came around. It was all sunny, as if last night's downpour was but a dream. And next to me was sitting a monk and my bestie. I was so relieved to see him again under the daylight and bursted into tears. I couldn't tell what that overflowing emotion was, but I just kept crying. Soon, that overwhelming emotion bursted out as anger. I shouted to my bestie where he had been. Why did he leave me alone with the uni students?
What are you talking about? What uni students?
He said. According to him, we were just enjoying ourselves over a bottle. Then he had a call of nature for number 2 and came to the temple to use the toilet, all of which I don't remember. By the time he came back to tent, I wasn't there anymore. He looked around searching for me, but there was no sign of me. Then rain started pouring, and he kept searching for me in the rain. Well, it was long before mobile phone became a thing. Failing to find me, he came to the temple to ask for help, and while discussing with monks as what to do, he heard a faint scream, drowned in the sound of rain and wild stream, of me running towards. I was just dumbfounded. If his account be true, who were those I thought I met the night before? With whom did I drink? I just shivered. Then the monk who'd been listening quietly asked me,
The young students you said you met last night, weren't they 7 of them? 3 girls and 4 guys?
How did you know that? I said with wide eyes.
Well, I know them.
Monk said. According to him, about 20 years ago, 8 uni students came camping there together. They stayed at the temple the first night, and in the first morning, a female student said that she had a weird dream, of them flying over sky with wings, except for one guy who just looked up at them from the ground. They camped by the stream for the second day, but in the middle of the night, torrential rain started pouring down. They woke up and wondered how they could cross the stream safely to the temple. The girl who had a weird dream then came up with an idea to tie up together with a rope. That way they would prevent missing anyone. So they tied the rope about their waist, but it was too short to tie up the last guy, so they just said they would hold his hand instead. And in the middle of the wild water, one of them slipped and washed away, dragging the rest of them down the water. In the end, only the last one who was not tied to the rope survived, the one who stayed on the ground in the girl's dream. I was all goosebumps hearing the tragic story. Then something suddenly hit me. And how do you know all the details? Are you, perhaps? I asked the monk.
You guessed it right. I was the last student,
Monk replied. It's not my own story, but a friend recounted it as it happened to his relative. So make what you will. I myself believe it to be true. The father of that relative was a notorious delinquent when he was young. Let's call him Youngsu for the sake of the story. From the early age, Youngsu was already a spoilt brat and grew up into an unruly teenager that freely indulged himself in the world of drink, smoke, sex, and all that. His family was the richest in the region, and being the prince of the most powerful household, nobody, be it his teacher or even police officers, couldn't touch him easily. Anyway, one day, Youngsu and his mates skipped the class once again and went to a Buddhist temple in the local mountain. They weren't there to pray, of course, but to use the quiet space for their party. For the maximum effect, they didn't forget to pack a lot of drinks and pork belly to barbecue. For those who don't know, Buddhist monks don't drink or eat meat. The old abbot of the temple just tusked at them and just let them be. So the boys ate and drank into evening and fell asleep on the open floor. It gets chilly up in the mountain even in summer. When they woke up with the chills, it got already too dark to hike down. The delinquents broke into the main hall where the statue of Buddha were enshrined and used the cushions for the prayers to make their impromptu bed for themselves. But then, one of the boys suddenly stood up and walked into the mountain in a decisive manner and speed unlikely for a drunkard. Others got a bit baffled and caught him before he could walk further away. But then this boy now went into fits and convulsion. His mates didn't know what to do. It was way before mobile phones and they could not call for help either.
You sons of bitches!
Suddenly the abbot of the temple bursted in. Unlike earlier, he roared like an angry tiger. He then sat in front of the statue of Buddha and started chanting something to the rhythm of his wooden block, to which the boy's fit calmed down. The abbot came over to him, put his hand on his head, and handed him a string of beads to wear it on his wrist. The boy was now lucid, but started crying that he got a bad headache, so unbearably painful. The abbot said calmly, almost coldly.
I didn't mind you boys drinking and gorging on meat to work me up, but breaking into the holy space and disrespecting Buddha is a different matter. And now are you asking for help?
Other boys tried to calm their mate down, that they would go back to town as soon as the dawn broke. He would then get some painkillers and everything should be fine. But the boy kept crying, saying it wasn't that kind of headache. It was so bad, his head felt like breaking apart. Help me, help me. The abbot sighed and said,
There's nothing much I can do for you. Wait here a bit, I'll get help.
When he came back about an hour later, he was with an old lady who, as soon as stepped in the main hall, screamed,
What a mess! Get out! Get out of here! Right away!
When boys came out to the courtyard, the old woman then threw sea salt and atsuki beans at them, which stung on their skin. They thought that should be the damn old woman throwing them so hard at them, but apparently, when you're possessed by a ghost, these repellents feel particularly painful. After showering them with the salt and red beans, the woman walked up to the boy who was still crying, looked straight into his eyes and said,
I might be able to help others, but not you.
The desperate boy hung on to her.
It hurts so bad. Other guys are not even suffering anything. I'm dying, why won't you help me?
The boy whined.
If I helped you, I too would have to pay the price. I will die before my time,
the old woman said.
What are you talking about? Just help me, please.
Now the woman glared at the boy.
You should know better. What kind of blood runs in your family and you son of a traitor?
She spitted between her teeth. The boy dropped on the ground and bewailed.
But it's not me. It's not my fault.
Others didn't get what they were talking about. But later it turned out the boy's family was the direct descendant of a big traitor in the history who sold the nation to Imperial Japan for their own personal gains. The desperate and angry back and forth carried on into dawn, but in the end, boy's desperation seemed to win sympathy.
I must have gone soft with age,
the old woman grumbled, and then started massaging the limbs of the boy, chanting Buddhist scriptures. And like some miracle, the boy's headache was gone. The boy asked the name of his savior, but the woman said,
It will really finish me off if I told you my name. Just conduct yourself better from now on.
And then she turned to Yongsu now.
Here's a prince of a rich family. You take the family fortune for granted, don't you? Not knowing it's all for the hard work and goodwill of your ancestors. Wake up and straighten up yourself, you dog!
But I don't think her harsh warnings worked in the end, considering Yongsu's family lost all their fortune due to Yongsu's father and Yongsu's own misadventures. Last Sunday, Mom took me to get a prescription from a herbalist healer. Mom tried him and his prescription for her ailment, apparently to a good result. So she took often weak and sickly me too. But this guy wasn't just any herbalist. He was also a shaman serving a god of medicine. I didn't know any of this until I overheard his conversation with another visitor while I was waiting for my turn. The patient was mainly complaining about his shoulder, that it always felt so heavy and no massage or exercise seemed to help. Was it just him getting old and frail, he asked? And I became all ears upon hearing the healer's response.
No, it's a spirit hanging on to your shoulder.
Oh dear, what do I do then?
Asked the patient.
Is there a temple around that you haven't visited yet? Go there with sweets and candies. Choose really colorful and scrumptious-looking ones. Lay the sweets out on the table in front of the Buddha statue, and then walk away. You may feel chilly at the back. That's the spirit trying to hold you back. Don't ever look back and go straight back home. Never go back to the temple again. On the day, you may hear somebody calling you from behind. Don't look back, be it a monk or what. And you should go all by yourself, otherwise the spirit may attach to your companion.
I'm not exactly a skeptic, but never really thought or experienced anything paranormal, so it spiked my interest. The healer indeed picked up what my usual chronic issues are just by looking at me. Don't know if it was true that he could really see the flow of qi about a person as he claimed, but he's probably not a total con man. I get lots of lucid dreams. It's not like exciting accounts on the internet where one can do and control whatever one likes, but I just simply realize it's a dream. I have a habit of cracking knuckles, almost like a tick, but in a dream it won't make that satisfying cracking noise. Then, to make sure, I'll try to bend a finger backwards till it touches the back of my hand. And when that happens, I can be assured that I'm dreaming. So even when I find myself in a dangerous or tragic situation, like losing a friend or chased by a very scary man, if I find I can bend my finger backwards, I know it's just a dream, and I can just play along, relaxed, like an actor in a play. There's a reason I don't act out even when I know it's a dream. Once I had a dream of taking SAT. Then I noticed my knuckles wouldn't crack, which meant it was all but a dream. Of course, I didn't focus on test anymore and just sat back and whistled away. A mate in the next seat asked me,
"What are you doing?"
I huffed and said this was all just a dream. Then the mouth disappeared from the mate's face, and his expression turned to glowing rage, as if he'd kill me right there and then. And not just he, the entire room of students and the teacher looked at me with exactly the same intense hate. That became a trauma, and now I just play along even when I know it's a dream. Yesterday, while having a beer and fried chicken with a friend at his place, I happened to talk about that one weird lucid dream. He just said, and nothing much else, so I just moved to another topic. It got late and I got a bit too drunk, so decided to crash at friend's place for the night. We both lied in bed, and when I was just about to doze off, my friend abruptly said,
You see, you should not let them know that you know it's a dream. That only makes them try to make your dream more and more realistic and harder to notice it's a dream.
I was drowsy and couldn't be bothered much to go back to the old topic, so simply said, "Oh, right." But friend carried on.
What makes you notice it's a dream?
So I told him that I'd try bending my finger backwards.
Oh, now I get it,
friend said. I got sudden chills at his tone and turned towards him. And there he wasn't. I was just on my bed in my own room. I didn't have beer and fried chicken, and I don't have a friend like him at all. Actually, by now, I couldn't even remember how he looked. The whole evening was just a dream. Now I fear if my future dream wouldn't trick and trap me. It's not entirely unique that sometimes a certain personnel of eschatological religious background comes out and confidently announces the end is nigh. Not unidentified someday or 100 years later, but on a certain day of a certain month in what year, only to be proven wrong when the day arrives. But it rarely happens that such a happening becomes a nationwide scandal and gets to broadcasted real time. It happened in Korea in 1992. Lee Jang-nim was a Methodist pastor and used to work as a translator of Christian books. He coined the term Hyugo as the translation of rapture. Hyugo can be roughly translated as getting lifted up. If you're not familiar with the term rapture in this context, it's a concept usually condoned by some of American evangelical churches. At the beginning of the end days, a large part of faithfuls shall be lifted up to the sky and meet Jesus, while those left behind on earth shall face the 7-year-long Armageddon till Jesus' ultimate triumph over Antichrist. There's an episode of American Dad, the cartoon series, that explains the whole concept much better and more entertainingly than I ever can. If you're interested, I'll leave the link in the description and at the corner of the screen. Anyway, back to the main story. Lee Jang-nim started his own church in the late 1980s and named it Dami Mission Church. Dami here is an abbreviation of the impending future. He predicted the date of the rapture should be 28th October 1992 and set preparing for the day as the ultimate goal of his new church. He did explain how he calculated the date out methodically, but the basic idea was, according to the prediction of Nostradamus, the end of the world should happen in 1999, and because there should be the 7-year Armageddon prior to that, so the rapture should take place in 1992. I mean, crude calculation aside, I'm amused that the pastor didn't feel any irony to use Nostradamus, a Renaissance period astrologer and occultist, as one of his crucial parameters. But the time was ripe. It was nearly the end of millennium. Recent Gulf War stirred up the fear of potential World War III. Even hardcore skeptics heard that Nostradamus predicted the end of the world in 1999, etc., etc. By 1991, Lee Jang-nim's church and rapture date had stirred up so much commotion that even serious news and investigative programs started reporting about it. Even I, still a little boy growing up in a totally non-religious family, clearly remember the word Hyuga, rapture, thrown about from numerous pamphlets the church circulated and growing media attention. Predictably, decisively fatalistic lead of the church had very strong impact to its followers' lives. There are numerous accounts how it led to self-destructive behaviors. Encouraged by their church, many gave up their livelihood and left their family to fully dedicate themselves to propagation of the impending rapture. Many sold off all their assets and donated them to the church. Some passionate teenagers, when they were forbidden to attend the church by their concerned parents, rather chose to end their life. There was even one known case of a pregnant woman who chose to abort, fearing her body getting too heavy for the rapture. All the while, their leader, Lee Jang-lim, accumulated a huge sum of wealth from their dedicated followers, about 34 million Korean won, in today's value about 75 million, which is equivalent to 5.6 million US dollars. Finally, a month before the rapture day, he said, the authority arrested him for a fraud charge. But that didn't stop his followers to sing and march towards the day of rapture. On the night of 27th October, hundreds and thousands of members gathered in various branches of the church, while their concerned and anxious family members waiting outside. At the headquarters in Seoul, major broadcasters sent their team to report in real time, and police sent officers to control the potential chaos. The followers dressed up in all white and didn't forget to put a name tag on either, so that the left-behinders could identify who was raptured. As the midnight approached, the mood inside the church got, well, literally rapturous. People chanted, prayed, sang, jumped, and cried to oblivion until the clock hit the midnight. And they were still left on earth, still clad in their now sweat-soaked white clothes. Their leader Lee Jang-lim was so dead set with his prediction and previously said the Lord wouldn't miss it by a second. People carried on in hope and prayers for 20 minutes and then 30 minutes. Loud singing and prayers gradually died down. Many just sat on the ground, looking stunned and lost. There was a brief stir with one person shouting, "It's happening!" But it turned out he just saw a moth flying away. Soon a chaotic scene ensued. Some bursted into rage, ripping their Bible and breaking stuffs in the church. A pastor was caught by angry family of the church members and sustained a few punches. Other pastors quietly disappeared with their tails between their legs. Some hung on to their hope, saying it's all God's will, or some even saying the time was supposed to be the Jerusalem time, not Korean time, which runs 7 hours later. But of course, still nothing happened at 7 in the morning. But most left the church, hiding their face from TV cameras. Fortunately, there was no mass violence or suicide attempt as feared. The happening became a mockery and a cautionary tale all over the media a while. Meantime, the leader Lee Jang-lim was sentenced to 1 year imprisonment for fraud. Among the proofs against him was a repurchase agreement bond of 3 million worth, due in 1993. Lee Jang-lim explained it was for those left behind after the rapture. But for most, it was a definitive proof that he himself didn't believe his own prediction. Tami Mission Church made an official apology and closed its door on 3rd November. Lee Jang-lim, after serving his sentence, changed his name and still carries on as a pastor. In 2011, he was belatedly honored as the co-winner of Ig Nobel Prize for Mathematics for his spectacular calculation for the day of the rapture, along with a handful of others who predicted the end date of the world. When I was little, I was rather sickly. I must have had weaker qi, as people often put it, and I had a few weird experiences, and this one stands out the most. My family was rather poor and lived in very much a backwater village where there were still some thatched houses in the neighborhood and people still used cows to plow the field. My family home was a typical old-fashioned farmhouse. When one opened the room door, there was an open wooden floor that straight led to the courtyard. At nights, there was not a single light outside, but at least I could see the wonderful night sky full of stars then. Both my parents worked, and they usually came back home late. My granny was there to take care of me, but I always eagerly waited for my parents every evening, and as soon as I heard the gate opening, I ran out to see if they were my parents. And one evening, I heard the gate opening, and went out to the open floor as usual, and in the night sky were all sorts of lights of images like a most spectacular fireworks or 3D laser light show. I didn't even know what it was then, but amongst those grand imageries was the Statue of Liberty too. Probably I was still so young to question that unlikely view, and I got just excited. I jumped and giggled with joy. But soon, the sky turned red, and the beautiful spectacles turned to that of scary ghosts and monsters in an instant, and they were all staring at me. I, of course, ran back to the room full of fear. The thing is, such a weird experience repeated at least a few times more. A few years later, my family moved to a different town and I didn't see it again. As I got older, I just thought that memory should be somewhat a warped one, either something I dreamt or mixing up image of my fantasy and some TV cartoons, perhaps. Until one day I asked my granny out of impulse. "Granny, do you remember back then when we lived in the old farmhouse?"
Of course,
Granny said. "Do you also happen to remember, did I ever run out the open floor and suddenly jumped and laughed and only to run back to the room next moment all stunned?" I said, honestly expecting her not to remember anything such.
Ah, yes. You often went out the floor after dark, and whatever you saw, you laughed and clapped your hands loudly, and soon ran back to me with a crying face,
Granny said. I was all goosebumps to have my childhood memory confirmed by my granny for the first time. Whatever was that I witnessed then? About 2 months ago, I got a call late at night from a friend.
"Help me! I can't get out of my flat,"
he said. What was he talking about? I asked.
"I can't find the exit. It feels like I'm stuck in a maze,"
friend said. He must be joking, or was he drunk? I thought, and told him to knock it off. But his voice had not a trace of joke. In the end, I agreed to come around to his place. I rang the bell at his door, but nobody answered. I tried the door knob just in case, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. I slowly walked in and called for my friend from the hallway. "Hey, I've come."
"Help me."
His voice was heard from inside. Maybe he was hurt, perhaps fallen down hard somehow. I hurried myself to his bedroom. Friend was standing still in the middle of the room.
he looked all right. What are you doing? Called me in all this way for a silly joke? I shouted.
But I can't find my way out,
Friend said, again without a hint of irony. What the heck? Come, this way. I called him from the outside door, and he came out to the living room and then seemed to head to the hallway. But then he turned around back towards his room, and then turned around again to the living room before he got there. And that way he kept making a loop around, with his face getting paler. "Stop it! What's wrong with you?" I shouted. My panic bursted out as an anger.
I don't know, but I'm not joking. I really can't find a way out.
The face of friend saying this looked truly mortified. Something must be really wrong. I dragged him out of there, came to my place, made him sleep, and took him to a hospital first thing in the morning. He was diagnosed with cerebral infarction. It wasn't fatal, but he needed hospitalization for some time. Apparently, when our brain malfunctions, it could turn the everyday normal situation suddenly into something uncanny or inconceivable, doctor explained. Fortunately, the treatment was successful, and my friend is back to his normal life. The incident gave me lots to think about how weird our brain is, and its relationship to all the mystery and paranormal stories. Maybe malfunctioning brain is more common than we think. I am omitting any detail that may suggest which military base it took place, so please don't assume anything. Spring 2009, it was Sunday. I, by then a well-worn sergeant, played a board game with a mate, and those who just came back from the Sunday service at church nagged us to let them join in. From the outside, I could hear the boys from the 1st Battalion playing football with the usual healthy dose of swears and shouts. By all measures, it was just any usual Sunday, as peaceful as you could get in the military base. At lunchtime, I didn't feel like the usual lackluster offer from the mess hall, so instead went to PX to grab some snacks. There I ran into a fellow sergeant from the 1st Battalion, and he told me about this weird newbie soldier he got in his battalion. That he seemed to have turned to self-cutting or something. As they played football earlier, he saw the newbies wearing all stained clothes. My mate was about to taunt him to wash his clothes. Then he realized the stains were of blood. He asked the newbie if he got hurt somehow, but the newbie replied, "I'm not hurt. It's not my blood." My mate frankly didn't care for him enough to ask for more details, so just let him be. We made jokes among ourselves if he wasn't having his period or something. And just as we walked out of PX, we saw the military police car rushing by. Time was just passing 1:30 then. Soon the whole base was seized by an ominous storm. All the soldiers were told to drop whatever they were doing and to stand by at the barracks. Nobody knew what was going on, but the air was so tense that one could cut it with a knife. Soon officers went around the barracks shouting if anybody had a blood donor card that they should donate it. For about an hour, there were officers rushing around, shoutings here and there, and then came silence. A heavy and unpleasant silence.
We were all kept on standby for the rest of the day. It was only by the dinner time that we heard what happened. A child of an officer was found stabbed at the church in the base. The culprit was promptly caught, the mad newbie private from the 1st Battalion. That crazy guy stabbed a poor kid at the throat multiple times who was playing alone in the empty church after the morning service, and with his clothes still stained with the blood of the kid, he nonchalantly joined the football game. Following 3-4 days, the base was seemingly back to the usual routine. Nobody said anything, but the air remained heavy. Then came the news that the kid passed away despite of all the effort. A few days later, the military police led the crime scene reenactment. The mad newbie calmly stated how he prepared everything. Checked when the church should get empty, checked where he could find a knife, checked where he could get hold of the key to the knife cabinet. The father of the dead kid couldn't contain himself to the end. He bursted into animal-like cries and unintelligible screams, and police had to hold him down, charging towards the murderer. And that was it. The base ran as usual. Nobody mentioned about the murder anymore. Not even whereabout the officer, father of the dead kid, was gone. It was only a few months later, shortly before I discharged, that I got to hear what the mad newbie private said as his reasoning of a killing. While he himself was imprisoned in the military, he hated to see kids carefreely playing and running about. So much so, he had to kill the kid. That was it. I rather wish it were all just a made-up story. In my 3rd year in university, I was on my way back home from a little trip with the uni mates. Most of mates took express buses back home, but I felt I was too drunk to go through on and off through public transportations, so took a taxi instead. To Seoul, please, I said.
Okay.
Even to my drunken ear, the driver's voice sounded a bit off. It just sounded unnatural and sly. It's the hindsight, but I shouldn't have dismissed the gut feeling. But in that moment, I just wanted to go back home quickly. All the while, the driver kept checking on his phone. Not safe, but we all do that occasionally. But what made me feel uneasy was, every time he lifted his eyes from the screen of his phone, next thing he checked out was me on the back seat through the rearview mirror. Even in the darkness in the car, I couldn't shake off the sense of being watched and targeted. Seoul was still a good 1 hour away, too long to sit through this uneasy situation. Trying to shake it off, I called a close friend. Now, the driver didn't take his eyes off of me, listening to what I should say. It made it clear to me that he was on something. Was he even a real taxi driver? I discreetly leaned over to check on the driver's registration on display, but I couldn't find it. My imagination was running wild. Perhaps he was a criminal on a stolen vehicle? But I just kept babbling on the phone, trying not to give away that I noticed anything. Fortunately, it was the route I was familiar with because my family often used it to visit a relative,
And so I could quickly notice it when the driver started taking a detour to Uijeongbu instead of Seoul. The way to Uijeongbu is winding and hilly. Any normal driver wouldn't take it instead of the wider and more straightforward road to Seoul. I frantically looked around to pick up any landmark on the way and passed it on to my friend on the phone. Wow, now I'm passing Kwonul Army Base. The driver clearly heard it. He gave a quick glance at me and took out something from the glove box. A boxy machine that resembled to me a credit card reader. As soon as he turned it on, my phone started losing signal. Now the game was all out between me and the driver. I desperately moved around from one corner to another at the back seat, not to lose the signal. In the end, I opened the window and put half of my body out with the phone. The driver didn't say anything, but kept driving on, occasionally fiddling with the machine. Now, the taxi was reaching a quiet and isolated road, heading to a mountain. I just knew I would be dead if we reached a mountain where there was nobody else. I started shouting to the phone, to the driver, or perhaps to anybody who would listen. "Hey, I'm going to Seoul, but the driver's taking me into a mountain. Isn't it effing strange?" Tree branches hit and scratched my face, poking well out of the running car, but I carried on shouting, giving my friend any landmarks I could pick up. The taxi suddenly stopped. The driver threw the machine back in the glove box.
I took the wrong route. Excuse me.
The voice, spitting out the unlikely excuse, sounded robotic. He temperamentally took the reverse gear and headed back to the main road. As the taxi reached a more brightly lit and crowded area, I felt the tension leaving my body. I slouched back down on the seat, but still never stopped talking to my friend. I was soaked with sweat and my face was messed with scratches and leaves. I glared at the driver on the rearview mirror, but this time he didn't give me a single stare all the while, till we reached Seoul. I chose to get off at a random metro station instead of my home because I didn't want to give away whereabout I lived. When I finally got off the car, and as he roughly drove away, I heard him spitting out,
"What a lucky bastard."
I just stood there and looked at the taxi driving away for a long time, unable to move. One day, a shaman opened a business right opposite of my family home. She must have been good. Tons of clients visited day and night, and when she put on a ritual, the noise was deafening even across the alleyway. My dad is pretty easygoing character, and he took it light-heartedly for quite some time. But the continuing noise, and especially her clients parking their car right in front of our house, finally ticked him off the line. He decided to have a word with the shaman, and I joined him. Dad started it off calm and friendly, but the shaman hit it back with such an attitude. "Don't dare to interfere with God's business. Just go," she said. Nobody would take it good-heartedly. Dad lost his temper and shouted back, "I hear a shaman's vocation is caring and helping people. Should you disturb your neighbor and don't give a toss about it? You're but a shitty shaman. I'm sure the god or demon you're serving is just as shitty." "What? How dare you nothing insult my god? Piss off before you are hit by the divine curse."
Shaman screamed. I was just as angry, so yelled, "Fuck you and fuck your damn god too!" before we left. But then, right from the following day, my dad, who'd been healthy as a bull all his life, started complaining severe backache, which quickly developed into inexplicable weakness and ailments. He went through various medical tests, X-ray, CT, ultrasound, but they found nothing, while Dad could hardly move by himself. I thought of the shaman talking about curse, but didn't want to believe such a thing. But then, when I myself started to feel ill with achy shoulders and general sense of weakness, I couldn't quite brush it off anymore. In the end, I sought another shaman to see if my suspicion had any substance. As soon as I walked into the shaman's room, she threw a handful of rice at me and shouted, "Wherever have you got so many dirty curses all over you? Get out!" I was stunned and hung on to her to help me and save me. She said the curse was from a more powerful god than hers, and there wasn't much she could do. She barely managed to get off the curse stuck on my shoulder, and indeed, I felt the pain and weight off my shoulder. But she said it was all but a temporary relief. Following day, I talked about my situation to some uni mates, just to let the weight off my mind, if nothing else. Then it turned out the mother of one of the mates suffered shaman's illness a while back and got help from some foreign healer, witch, or occultist. He read tarot cards and could deal with various spells too, he said. I nagged the mate till he connected me to him. The foreigner, I don't know how else to address him exactly, spoke surprisingly good Korean, and one of his eyes was all clouded as if covered by a white translucent film. He claimed he could see what others can't see with that eye. He then put some ornament with a star sign on my forehead and chanted some spell. He said it was to get rid of the curse from my shoulder and also block any further attacks. But that was only a small bit of the trouble my family was facing. I begged him to help me and my dad further. The foreigner sighed and said,
"It's a complex problem involving local god and the deity of the territory. That shaman is definitely not an easy one. I can't promise you anything."
But I kept begging on, and he finally agreed to visit my home, first to see the situation in person. He looked around my home and the surroundings.
"The god your neighbor serves is not any old shamanic deity. He is big and powerful. Otherwise, the shaman couldn't have opened a business in this town."
According to him, this area had been guarded by the territorial deity for a long time, and other usual shamanic gods wouldn't dare to hang around here. But the god my neighbor served was so powerful that even the time-old territorial deity could not beat.
"The territorial deity is naturally very upset now, and that could be our weapon,"
foreigner said. For that, he would first have to help the deity to regain his power, and he needed a week to prepare. A week passed, and the foreigner returned with all sorts of weird-looking objects like a dagger, stick, goblet, various dry herbs, and an incense burner. He took it up to the local mountain and performed a ritual of a sort. Burnt herbs in the burner, walked around it, then threw some powder that flared up the fire, then sang some chant in the language I didn't understand. He carried it on for about an hour, and then digged up some dirt.
which he brought back to my place, made into a paste with water, and painted it all over the walls of my house. He must have seen my expression of saying, "What the F?" and explained that was to mark the house as the territorial deity's ground. It was not the ultimate solution, but would help to fend off the attacks from the shaman. And lo behold, from that day on, my dad, who couldn't move by himself by then, started walking again, though his ailments was still there. The foreigner said it would take further 3 days for the territorial deity to recover, and came back 3 days later, once again with various stuffs. As I helped him unloading the stuffs, my neighbor the shaman came out and stared at us. Foreigner said to her first,
"You have so much power. Shouldn't you use it for the good rather than to harm others?"
"Some half-baked thing dares to interfere. Piss off if you don't want to die before your time!" shouted the shaman and went back into her house. Having met her face to face, Foreigner confirmed once again the shaman and her god were indeed overwhelmingly powerful. He first put up several pieces of cloth with weird letters written on around the house, which he said was something similar to talismans. Then he put 3 statuettes on the table I prepared for him and chanted a spell. He explained soon there would be a spiritual battle against the shaman's god. He was so powerful that there was no way he could fight against the god alone, and he was now summoning help from other gods. The territorial deity he boosted up wouldn't join the battle directly, but he would form the basic defense line. Say, should the shaman's god wield the sword, the territorial god would make the sword rust away. Foreigner then took out 5 black candles, put some scented oil on them, added a metal object in star shape on the table, and burnt some sort of resin in the incense burner. Once the table was set, he sang some weird song and walked around the table with the incense burner in his hand. And right that moment, be it a coincidence or not, sudden gusts of wind rattled the windows.
"It has begun,"
Foreigner said. He now sat down and chanted to the rhythm of a bell, and just as to rival it, I could hear the typical noise of a shamanic ritual from the neighbor.
"If we win this battle, all the curses they initiated shall go back to them,"
Foreigner said. It lasted at least an hour of him chanting, ringing the bell, standing up, and gesturing away as if pushing something away. Then he shivered all over like a man with a most intense convulsion, and in the end, passed out. Fortunately, he got around again not long after.
I think we won,"
he said. All chills and goosebumps. Just some moments later, I heard an ambulance rushing into our alleyway and took the shaman away. Apparently in the middle of the ritual, the shaman walked on the blades. It's one of the typical performances some shamans demonstrate during the shamanic ritual. They show their god's power by showing that they could walk on a sharp blade without getting hurt. But that day, the blade cut my neighbor's flesh into deep wounds.
"As I said, they are now met by their own curses,"
said the foreigner before he packed his stuff and left. 2 days later, my dad was up and running again like his ailments were all but a dream, while our neighbor, even after she came back from hospital, seemed to have lost her power.
The endless flow of clients dried up, and she moved out not long after. I'm just an ordinary guy of 28. When I was 9, I had a dream. In the dream, I was on my way back home from school and ran into a blue truck that was just driving out of the gate of my apartment block. It was an unusual car in the neighborhood, and I was pretty enthusiastic about cars at the time, so I paid a special notice to its registration number of the model. My eyes then naturally drifted up to the inside of the car. There were 3 guys, all dressed in black suits and wearing black sunglasses. They smirked, a creepy smile looking down at me. Anyway, I went back home and found it so quiet. My mom would usually have welcomed me. I started checking room by room, looking and calling for Mom. The last door I opened was to the balcony. The first thing I saw was red. The whole floor of the balcony was covered with sticky red, and the red was coming from Mom, slouched down at one corner. Even in the dream, I screamed so hard, and I woke up all wet with tears and sweat. In the morning, I didn't want to go to school. I didn't talk about the dream, but I certainly didn't want to leave the side of my mom. But clueless Mom got angry for my blind protest and spanked me out to school. I of course could not focus on anything all day, and as soon as the school ended, I hurriedly packed my things to go home. But I froze in the middle when I realized that I dreamed this very moment in the last night's dream. I ran all the way home, but my foreboding became an undeniable truth when I saw a blue truck slowly driving out of my apartment block. I desperately checked its model and number, praying that I be wrong. But just like that, they all matched what I dreamed. Inside the truck were 3 guys in black, and they smirked the same creepy smile at me. I ran to my apartment. It was silent, just like in the dream. I was crying and shaking uncontrollably as I opened the balcony door. There was no blood or Mom. Just then, Mom came in carrying both hands full of shoppings. I think I dropped on the floor and just bursted into crying. Mom, of course, didn't know what was up with me, but hugged me to calm down. A dream is just a dream after all, I assured myself, and went to lie down on bed to calm down. But then I heard Mom's sharp exclamation. I ran out to the living room. Mom was looking at the TV that was reporting a news that a woman was found dead in the balcony of her apartment, which was in our block. The report further said that the police was searching for the suspected vehicle in relation to the murder, a blue truck. I met my uni mates after 2 months long summer vacation. We, of course, drank. And there he told me a story of his body. He told it in a pretty serious manner, so I guess it should be true. Let's call my mate's friend Jinsu for the sake of the story. Jinsu is a pretty solid guy, sensible and easygoing. He recently lost his grandpa, who very much adored Jinsu when he was alive. Recently, Jins was going through a hard time with several bad news striking him at the same time. So, one night, he had a couple of shots before bed, even though he usually doesn't like to drink. Probably was his exhaustion or the alcohol. As soon as he lied down, he felt as if he was sucked down to the ground. And then, the next moment, he felt lifted up to the sky again. When he looked around, he was somewhere everything was glowing in a warm white light. And in that light was his late grandpa. He motioned to Jinsu to come closer. When Jinsu did, Grandpa calmly lifted his hands and counted 6 with his fingers. Jins was just happy to see his beloved grandpa again and wanted to tell him all the pressing troubles of his, but the moment he opened his mouth, he woke up from the dream. It was already morning. What a weird dream. Grandpa came to see him just in his time of trouble. But why did he show number 6? Could it be? Jinsu didn't even wash himself and ran straight to the corner shop still in his pajamas to buy that week's lottery ticket. 6, 16, 26, 36. He checked every number containing 6, and the rest 2 numbers he chose his birthday and month. After buying the ticket, he realized there was barely enough money left to buy an instant ramen for his breakfast. Well, what's the big deal? When he won the lottery, it'll all be just a memory. So, with a ramen and big hope, he came back to his room, put a pot of water on the stove, and opened a bag of ramen. And inside were 6 soup packets. Grandpa. My mother's father passed away shortly after I was born. His lifelong love was drinks, more so than his family and even grandchildren. Even when he got his first grandson in his arms, his face was just meh. Soon he handed the baby back to his mom, saying he's meeting his friends for a drink. One night he came back home from such drinks and said to Grandma,
On my way back just now, I saw 3 strange guys at the edge of the village. They smirked, seeing me. I can't shake off the feeling they were Grim Reapers.
You drank so much that you are seeing what's not there. Stop drinking so much and bothering me with the nonsense.
Grandma grumbled back.
Maybe it's time. But I don't want to go alone,
Grandpa said, looking out the darkness outside the window. I guess Grandma sensed some unusual vibe from him that night and talked about it to her children. My aunt, Mom's sister, assured Grandma that it was just alcohol, saying it was nothing unusual from their alcoholic father, was it? Such was the assurance Grandma needed, but deep inside, she seemed still concerned. A few days later, Grandpa was hospitalized. Apparently, he was found unconscious inside a narrow drain pipe. People just assumed he might have fallen there somehow on his drunken way back home. He didn't gain consciousness even after he was sent to hospital, which prompted doctors to perform various tests. What they found was a late-stage liver cancer. It had already spread it to other organs, and there wasn't much they could do anymore. What shocked the family further was When Grandpa finally woke up and doctor passed on the news of the cancer, he seemed totally unaffected, like he had been told that he got a common cold, as if he knew it all already. He didn't stop drinking even after the diagnosis, and passed away in his sleep not long after. On that very night of his passing, Grandma was woken up by the voice of Grandpa mumbling,
I don't want to go alone.
Huh? What did you say?
Grandma asked.
I don't want to go alone.
Grandpa was lying facing away from Grandma, and Grandma shot back to his bent, bony back.
That again. You're not going anywhere. Just sleep now.
Should I go first? I'll come back to take you then. I will.
And that was his last word. It left Grandma paranoid since Grandpa's funeral. Even with a cut she got while working on the field, she'd say,
Look at this. Your father's trying to take me away. I tell you.
Her children got a bit tired when their mom's paranoia continued for months, and just brushed her anxiety with,
Mom, just forget it. Dad couldn't have meant that.
Grandma reacted to that with growing resentment.
You're on your father's side, aren't you? You'll forget it was me who raised you up, while your alcoholic father couldn't care less.
Then one day, Uncle, my mom's younger brother, saw Grandma put on her Sunday best from the early morning and went out. He and his sister actually welcomed that because they thought she was finally shaking her paranoia away and going out for socializing. But it soon turned to concerns when Grandma didn't come back till late night. Then they got a call from the local police station that their mother was there. Mom, her sister, and brother all rushed to the station and found their mother a mess, as if she'd been rolling about on a mud pit.
Mom, where have you been? What happened to you?
Mom asked.
Your dad came to take me,
Grandma said. Mom's built-up anxiety and concern bursted out as an anger.
Stop it, Mom! He's dead! How much longer are you holding on to him?
Mom taunted. But when the police explained where they found Grandma, even Mom and her siblings could not shake off a chill, because Grandma was found in the narrow drain pipe, the same place where Grandpa was found. Not long after, Grandma passed away in her sleep. When I was 9 or 10, I don't even remember who, but a distant relative passed away, and I attended the funeral with my parents. It wasn't anybody I was close to, so I had no feeling at all. Before we set off for the funeral, my grandma called me to the side. I waited what she had to say. She said,
There's something on your hair.
But in actuality she cut a few strands of my hair. She burnt a part of them and rolled it up in a paper with a handful of rice and dried jujube fruit. She then handed me the weird bundle and told me,
At the funeral home, throw it in the bin.
I asked what the rice and jujube were for, but she simply explained,
Well, a mouse shouldn't eat your hair, and rice and jujube will distract it.
I already knew my granny was pretty superstitious, so I just said I would. Upon arriving at the funeral, I, like a good boy, threw the rolled-up paper in a bin. The funeral carried on over midnight, and being a kid, I fell asleep in the back room. Then as now, I usually slept like a dead man and didn't get much dream. But that night, I had my very first sleep paralysis. I opened my eyes but could not move my body. There was nobody else around in sight, and I could just lie there helplessly. I rolled my eyes towards the weird noise. There was a woman. Her long hair was all tangled and stiff. Her hands and feet were bent in the wrong way, and she was dancing around the bin where I threw the bundle in earlier. Her neck seemed completely broken off, and her head wiggled around all directions as she jumped around. The creepy sound I heard were her manic giggle and her long nails scratching on the wall. I was so terrified that I couldn't even think to shut my eyes. Between her manic giggle and dance, the woman said,
Little boy, wrapped in shroud already. No flesh, no bones, all burnt and only hairs left. But somebody fed you already. Were it not for the ritual, I would have taken you among other lost souls and keep you as my company.
She giggled on for a long time, took the paper bundle, and disappeared. It goes without saying, it traumatized me. I think I didn't leave the side of my grandma day and night for the following 1 month or so.
My mother appears in my dream too often nowadays,
Dad said at breakfast table one day. His mother, my grandma, passed away 3 years ago. She was a warm and loving character, and I only have fond memory of her. But she did leave one little mystery. At her deathbed, I and Dad were keeping her side, and the last word she uttered, like regretting an unfinished business, was, I lost the nose. Neither Dad nor I could understand what she could have meant by that, until it all unfolded. Dad is usually far from superstitious nor very spiritual, but he seemed to get pretty uneasy about Grandma keep appearing in his dreams, and in the end decided to seek a shaman. I accompanied him to a place named Cheonusa. It was the first time visiting a shaman for both of us, and I was struck by the very particular vibe there, colorful murals and a trace of incense in the air.
Your mother sent you here, didn't she?
The old shaman said, and I was already impressed.
Yes, it's about my mother,
Dad said.
She's still suffering from the mistake she made back in the days.
Mistake? What do you mean?
I don't have anything more to say for now. Go and move her tomb to a different plot, and then come back to me.
What? Moving a tomb is no child's business. You should at least tell me why.
If you delay, It'd be like killing your mother the second time,
Shaman said with a firm voice, and told us to go. As Dad said, it was no child's business to exhume and move to a different burial plot. It took days of contemplation and some serious discussions with relatives before Dad could finally make up his mind. On the day of exhumation, while the hired hands digging Grandma's tomb, my mother and aunts cried like the day Grandma was buried the first time. Dad and Uncle too looked all grave and uneasy. When the coffin was taken out, it was Dad's job to open it up as the firstborn son of the family.
"Forgive us, Mother,"
said Dad, and lifted the top. Granny was all shrunken and dried up like a mummy I saw in films. I couldn't bear the sight and turned my head away. Dad and Uncle took her body out of the coffin, but Uncle dropped her again.
"Be careful!"
Dad shouted angrily.
"No, brother, look!"
Uncle said, pointing inside the coffin. Grandma's body was all wet, all over her back down to her thigh. Not only that, the bottom of the coffin was covered with black stone grits. It isn't unheard of that groundwater sometimes seeping into the coffin, even though that is considered most unfortunate. But there was no way to explain the presence of grits at the bottom of the coffin. The top was sealed tight, and the black stone was nothing like the red and brown dirt around the burial plot either. The following day, Dad returned to the shaman with me again.
"Did you move your mom's tomb all right?"
Shaman said.
"Just as you said. Yes,"
Dad said.
"It's not over yet. Doesn't your mother still appear in your dream? Frequently, too."
Shaman said with no hesitation, as if she knew everything already.
Yes, she does. And says the same thing time after time."
"Of the man in black, eh?"
Yes. That the man in black suit would throw stones at her back."
"Those stones represent the man's nose."
"What? Nose? Could that have anything to do with what she said the last? I lost the nose was her last word."
Shaman tusked, with her eyes seemingly getting glisten.
"So it was. She lost it,"
she said more to herself, and added,
"Where were you born?"
"Me? In Yeongdam-dong in Jeju Island."
Indeed, Dad was born and grew up in Jeju Island with his mother, while his father worked in Seoul.
"That man in black is Harubang of Jeju Island,"
Shaman said. Harubang in Jeju dialect means a grandpa, an old man. By today, it usually means the local totem carved out of black basalt stone abundant on the island. Nobody exactly knows its origin and what they were made for, but usually considered as a guardian totem and a bringer of good fortune. By now, it's the indisputable mascot of Jeju Island.
"But what has Harvan got to do with my mother? And the nose?"
Dad asked.
"Your mother once cut off the nose of a Harubang,"
Shaman said.
"What? But what for?"
"It must have been while your mother was pregnant with your youngest brother. Your brother was born with a cleft lip, wasn't he? The
The shaman seemed to know the entire family history like the back of a hand.
That's true. Even though now you don't see it after he got an operation.
Before your brother was born, your mother seeked a shaman, and the shaman told her to cut the nose of a harabang, boil it, and drink the water to save her new baby from a cleft lip.
But he was born with one nonetheless.
Well, the shaman was a crook. The instruction didn't work and only earned the wrath of a harabang.
By the way, Mother would appear lying on water in my dreams, and her coffin was indeed wet too.
Of course. The angry tears of a harabang pooled into a lake.
That explained everything. The wet coffin and the mystery black grits.
So, what do I have to do?
Dad said.
Take this talisman and string of beads. Put the talisman up on the ceiling and wear the beads when you go to bed.
Is that all?
Course not. You think it's so easy to appease to decades-old wrath? The harabang should appear in your dream. Drop on your knees and beg for his forgiveness. And at the end of it, put the beads around harabang's neck and bow him twice. That might do.
Might? You're not sure then?
How could I be sure? It's a god's business, and I'm just a person.
I see. Well, how much should I pay for the talisman and beads?
No need. Just do as I tell you.
But I heard one always has to pay for a shaman's service.
I said no need. Go now.
Shaman's voice was firm as before. Back home, Dad put the talisman next to the ceiling light and went to bed about midnight with the beads around his neck. He looked visibly tense. I myself had a hard time falling asleep in vague anticipation. Following morning, I went to see Dad first thing in the morning. Did you see harabang in your dream?
I indeed did. At first, I found myself walking on the water, and then I saw somebody from afar. As I got closer, I could see it was a man dressed in black suit and black fedora. So, as Shaman told me, I dropped down and begged to forgive your grandma. I didn't see his lips moving, but somehow I heard his voice clearly, saying, "Not before you bring your mother's nose."
Wow, that's creepy, I said.
Frightening. Even in the dream I could feel cold sweat rolling down my back. I knew he wouldn't be persuaded, so in the end I just hung the beads around his neck and bowed twice. And harabang sunk down under the water. By the way, let's visit the shaman again. Need to get confirmed if that's really is it. And thank her.
So we did return. But how odd. The sign of Shaman's establishment was nowhere to be seen. It was a crumbling little house in the slum-like quarter of the town. Still, it wasn't possible to lose the way when we visited it a couple of times already. After wandering around the area for a good half an hour, we went to a corner shop nearby to ask.
Don't you know a shaman's place near here called Chanusa?
Dad said.
Chanusa? You mean the mad old cow?
The shop owner said.
The landlord told her to move out, but she just stays on.
Right. Well, we saw her yesterday and can't find it today. The sign's gone too.
Really? She didn't seem to budge, saying BS like she was waiting for somebody or something. Well, good for the landlord then now.
Wait for somebody?
Somebody she was indebted to or something. How do I make a sense of the old mad cow?
In the end, we couldn't find the shaman again. Dad says he never saw her before, so I assume the person she was indebted to might have been my grandma. Who knows what was the tangled story of the two old ladies in the past? Whatever the case, the whole episode remains the most amusing mystery for me and my dad. I had a very close friend in my childhood, until he suddenly disappeared one day. Nearly 20 years later, thanks to social medias, I managed to track him down and we reconnected. We didn't even live far away, and soon we finally had a reunion. We first met at a beer hall near his place, catching up decades worth of life apart. It happened to be a night of the World Cup game too, so he invited me back to his place to watch the game together. There was still a couple of hours before the game started, and so we killed time playing football game on his PlayStation. I scored a goal against his team, and already full on football frenzy mode, I jumped up to make some goal ceremony and hit my beer can, splashing the liquid around.
Fuck!
My friend screamed, not jokingly or playing rough between boys, but full-on rage. I looked at him surprised, and he himself seemed surprised with his own outburst.
I'm sorry, Actually, I'm a bit, OCD,
he said after a few seconds. And he talked about the backstory of how he got to develop obsessive-compulsive disorder and how it got even worse. Back when we were close, I remember him complaining about his parents quarreling often, but I didn't know how bad it really was. His dad got physically violent, and in the end his mother filed a divorce and went away with my friend far from the old life and her husband. That was why he so suddenly disappeared. But the damage was done already. His mom had gone a bit mad after suffering the constant nitpicking behaviors from his ex-husband, and she totally abandoned any cleaning, washing, anything related to hygiene and cleanliness. Their home became a mess, and it became my friend's job to clean things after her, to the point of obsession. He now had to have every jar on the kitchen shelf and every bottle in the fridge in perfect line, their labels facing the front. A crooked picture frame would drive him mad until he could fix it. But the neatness and cleanliness actually helped him in his career because he indeed kept his surroundings and work perfectly in order. His boss was so impressed that he recommended my friend to the position in the HQ in Seoul, and my friend graciously accepted the opportunity. One thing he didn't expect was the insane real estate price in Seoul. Trying to find a room that met his standard and budget drove him further and further out the suburb, and he finally managed to find rather old but well-maintained house. And in the first summer there, one night he came back home after a drink with the colleagues and jumped into shower to wash off all the sweat and grime after the muggy summer day. That wasn't enough for him, of course. Though it was later than usual, he wouldn't skip the daily cleaning routine, starting from wiping off the dust from the top of the wardrobe.
He added one has to clean from the top because dust should settle to the bottom by the time one finishes the top. And there, he found a mystery handprint on the thin layer of dust on the top of the wardrobe. It prompted him to look around his room, and he noticed things nobody else would notice, like the cosmetic bottle on the vanity turned just ever so slightly away, or something swiped over the dust on the TV screen. Problem was, he found similar subtle disparities again the following day when he came back from work. Somebody was here. But nothing was missing, and the changes were so subtle that nobody other than a person with an advanced OCD like my friend would notice them. From the following morning, he took photos of his room before he left for work. With the actual proof, his suspicion turned to certainty. Somebody was there and touched his things. He couldn't yet report it to police. They would think he was mad if he should talk about the lotion bottle turned 15 degrees to the side from where he put it in the morning. He got a day off from work. In the morning he put on his suit, polished his shoes for 30 minutes as in any other morning, and went out. Then sneaked around the house and re-entered through the normally unused back door. He hid himself in the wardrobe and waited. 4 hours passed, and it was passing 1 in the afternoon. He got hungry and wasn't so sure if what he was doing was anyway sensible. But then, somebody unlocked the front door like it was perfectly normal and walked in. Suppressing jumping heart, my friend stuck his face to the crack between wardrobe doors to see. It was a woman. Her long hair reached down well over her knees. They were long and dirty as heck. She came in the middle of the room and stood there with her head hung forward till the long dirty hair touched the floor. Then didn't move at all. For 10 minutes and then 30 minutes. My friend had to conclude she was no sane person. The clock hit 2, and just then, the woman slowly started moving her body side to side. The movement got gradually bigger, till she started banging her head all around, accompanied with weird screeches. With that, her long hair flew all around, touching friends' cosmetic bottles, swiping over the TV screen. The subtle shifts and changes he'd been noticing were because they were touched by those disgusting hair. The thought made my friend retch. The woman's face that was revealed briefly when her hair flew about showed eyes half rolled up and giggling lips like a maniac in trance. With a shock and tremble, my friend shifted his legs a bit, and it made the wardrobe door open wider. The woman's head turned sharply towards the wardrobe. Her half-rolled-up eyeballs slowly came back down till they met my friend's frozen stare. The woman didn't flinch. She stepped towards his bed, lifted her dirty fingers to wiggle and subtly winkle the corner of the duvet on it, and ran away, screaming. It was like a very deliberate act to wind him up, as if she knew all about his obsession and exactly how to drive him mad. He made a report to the police, but they never found the woman. Who she was, how she got the access to his place, how she knew about his OCD and why she had to do such a thing. He moved out from the house, but his OCD got much, much worse ever since.
It's not a scary story, but it's nevertheless unforgettable for me. My dad passed away when I was 13, and my mom raised me alone. I can't say I was a very good son for her. 14th November last year, I came back home late from work, emptied a can of beer and went to bed. Then I had a dream. My mom appeared, her face wet with streaming down tears. "What's wrong?" I asked, but she didn't say anything. What woke me up was the ring of my mobile. It was a nurse from the hospital my mom was staying. My mom just passed away. I rushed to the hospital, but by then, Mom was already cold. It wasn't solely unexpected. She'd been staying in hospital for 6 months by then, unconscious after a massive brain hemorrhage. But facing her untimely death was still more devastating than I ever expected. During the 3-day funeral, I asked more than a few times to see her stored in the morgue and cried over her cold body. A few days after the funeral, I had a drink with some friends after work and was on my way home. Suddenly my heart bursted with longing for my mom. It was 6 in the evening, and winter evening got already totally dark, but I just headed to the mountain where Mom's ashes was scattered. There lied my dad, and ashes of my older brother, and now my mom. What was there to fear when 3 of my dearest people were lying there? I emptied 3 bottles of soju, crying, talking to them, and crying more. And then I think I dozed off, drunk. Then I felt somebody's hand caressing my face. It was soft and warm. I opened my eyes, and there was my mom, rubbing my face and looking down on me with eyes full of sympathy. I wanted to call out, "Mom!" but what came out was a burst of crying.
My boy, you should go home. You can't sleep here in the cold. You two don't want to go a long way, do you?
Said Mom, and urged me to get up. But I was so drunk, I couldn't even stand up. My car was about 500 meters down the mountain, and with my spinning head, I couldn't dare to take the way.
I'll come with you. Now, hold my hand,
Mom said, holding my hand. And strangely I felt lighter. I was still unsteady, but I felt like I was walking on the cloud, light and dreamy. And all the while, Mom's presence was so real. The warmth of her hand and her smell. When we reached my car, I couldn't hold my pee, so found a bush nearby to take a leak. When I turned back, Mom wasn't there anymore. I looked around, searching for her, but she wasn't there.
Leaning against my car, I took a cigarette. Even in death, Mom was caring for me. Why didn't I do better and be a better son for her when I had a chance? Tears poured down once again. I'm in the last year of vocational school. As usually is the case, I found an apprenticeship at a middle-sized company. It was a big deal for me. It might not only pave the first stone towards my future career, but also, provided I managed to keep my position for 4 years, it would also substitute the mandatory military service. All great. Except a mate from the same school got a post there too. I'll call him Kim for the sake of the story. I already disliked Kim from the school. He had a wild imagination and would talk of his fantasies as if they were facts. On contrast, I'm more of a type that sticks to proven fact. Basically, we were on natural clashing course, and we already had history of hot arguments and fights. But as I said, the apprenticeship is a big deal for me, and I didn't want the clash become an issue at work. I really tried to oppress my frustration whenever Kim went on with the BS as usual, and calmly explained to him what the actual facts were. My friends teased me that I grew the patience of a saint. But looking back, I should rather have just ignored Kim entirely. I won't explain what happened exactly, but Kim's blubbing snowballed into a serious problem at work. So serious that our school teachers came to visit the company, and even the education ministry got involved. My anger and frustration about Kim knew no bound at that point. I found a quiet corner in the storage and made sure there was no one around, and vented out.
Ah! Effing Kim, you son of a bitch, just die out of my life!
When I turned around to go back to my position, there he was, none other than Kim, staring at me. It totally caught me off guard that I yelled out the F word despite of myself. Caught red-handed, I didn't know what to say or act. Did he hear what I said? He must have. He must. Kim just stared at me without a word. The silence in that moment was so heavy that it almost felt suffocating. Kim then just turned around and walked out of the storage. I called out his name, but he didn't even bother to stop. Brief intention to apologize was quickly overtaken by fresh anger. He was the one that caused all the trouble, and why should I apologize? I yelled, "Suit yourself, you piece of shite!" Kim stopped. Curse my temper. Love him or hate him, Kim was bound to be my colleague for the next 4 years. I mumbled something again in attempt to apologize, and Kim slowly turned around to look at me. But no, it was just his head that was turning. I heard his neck bone break, ringing in the quiet hallway, face perfectly expressionless all the while, and it still didn't stop. The head kept turning. Skin around the neck stretched and wrung until it eventually ripped with bursting blood. It still didn't stop, and the head fell off from the body and rolled all the way till it hit my feet. Kim's face was now smiling wide, showing all his teeth. Okay, I did see some ghosts when I was little and had to seek help from a shaman and so on. But this
this was nothing like the shadow figures I saw then. Kim's crazy smile, the skin about his neck ripped and mangled like a burst over-ripened tomato. They were so real, just like real. Every cell in my body screamed to get out, but my body didn't respond until I heard a footstep approaching. It finally shook me out of the frozen state, and I screamed. I never knew I could be so loud. It's not even a big company, but I was later told that everybody in the office on the second floor heard me too. Before I realized it, everybody was surrounding me with surprised faces. I found myself collapsed on the floor, and Kim's head was nowhere to be seen. My direct boss asked me what was wrong, and that was the first time I saw normally dismissive him so worried. My ripping scream must have wrecked my vocal cords, that I coughed out some blood, and the manager of the company took me to a hospital. Later I heard Kim was working in his post all the while this was going on. It was a particularly busy day at his department, apparently, and he never left the post. My doctor, a psychologist, didn't believe what I recounted, of course. His focus was if I didn't take any substance or something, which, for hell, I have never ever. On my boss's recommendation, I took a week-long sick leave. And when I came back to work 7 days later, I heard Kim died. 2 days prior, the manager was the first one to arrive at the company. Before he sat down at his desk, he heard a loud thud. When he got out to check, he found Kim down at the bottom of staircase hall, his head crushed on the marble floor. When the police later checked on the record of the surveillance camera, it showed Kim walk up the stairs, then stopped to look down and throw himself down. It was a shock to everybody. Kim's parents believed it must be because Kim was bullied and made a big show at the company, and our normally butchy boss was so shaken that he had to seek therapy. And just now, I finished my shift and was resting, and I got a call from the manager. He asked me if I hung around on the ground floor earlier during my shift. Well, I didn't. My position is on the second floor, and I had no business on the ground floor until the lunch time. And then the manager explained.
You see, I was smoking by the parking lot outside, and I saw you staring at me from the window of the packing office on the ground floor. It was definitely you. You just gave me a look and quietly turned away. I mean, it's just considering what happened recently. I wanted to make sure if everything is all right,
he said. Now I'm shaken. I'm scared if I would not turn out like Kim for whatever reason. On the day I saw Kim's head breaking off, what made me scream out loud was not the sight of his head. It was to whom the approaching footstep belonged. It wasn't my boss, the manager, the line leader, or Miss Lee. It was me. I saw me walking backwards with my head turned back to stare back at me. That was why I screamed desperately. I'm scared now.
My story goes back to 1994. I was then a young, aspiring, and poor musician. The only room I could afford in Seoul was a tiny flat on the basement level. With no window, I could not tell if it was day or night there, and the poor plumbing let water drip down whenever I opened the tap. It was literally dark, wet, and eerie place. I guess it is no wonder that hardly any night there passed without a nightmare. I think I had all kinds of nightmares one could imagine whilst living there. But then, dreams are dreams, and I forgot all of them by now. Except for this one particular dream. One day I took a nap. In the dream, I was walking down through a town with my mother. Curiously, it seemed we were transported a few hundred years back. People on the street were all in the attire of the last dynasty. It was the market day, and the street was bustling with people and activities. Abruptly, a loud noise was heard from one corner. It sounded like half yelling and half singing of an elderly woman. It seemed stirring the crowd, and they started moving away from it. "What is that?" I asked a man who was passing by.
"That mad shaman hag is back," he said.
Indeed, among the crowd moving away, I caught the glimpse of the shaman woman in dirty white dress. Her hair was not too long, but dirty and messy, flying about her face like an ominous aura. Her paper-white face stood out even from the distance. I instantly got chills like a foreboding. I hurried Mom and get away from her. We found our way to a restaurant and set ourselves down. But the ominous air grew only more intense. The sense of uncanny that something twisted and deviant was prevailing. I tried to suppress the growing anxiety, waiting for our order to be served. But sudden warm breath of air brushed my cheek. The hot, disgusting air was like that from a rotting flesh. I instinctively turned my head and was met by the face of the shaman hag, staring just 5 centimeters from me. Her complexion was paper white, as if by a clown makeup. Her face was so swollen that her eyes were half closed. If it were not the actively emanating manic energy, the face would have rather belonged to a rotting corpse. And there I woke up from the dream with a startle, only to get paralyzed. I've had sleep paralysis numerous times from my childhood, and by then I knew very well how to break it too. Just calm down and relax, and without a fail, the paralysis broke itself. But that day, my confident trick didn't work. I wasn't sure what was going on. When,
"Don't try. Stay with me,"
a whisper was heard right up to my left ear. The voice was that of a sensual young woman. It got me totally off guard.
"Stay with me. Let me entertain you."
Something deviant was seducing me. I had to do something to save myself.
"Let me. You'll feel good."
That laughter brought out, beyond fear and bafflement, the will to fight. I felt my body concentrating the energy in me, like I was gearing up to sing a high note. And then words poured out from my mouth, despite of myself. "You damned soul! How dare you play your wicked tricks! Begone, I command! Begone!"
The moment I uttered the first word, my paralysis broke. I sat straight up on bed and heard the rest of the sentences shoot out from my mouth in a strangely old-fashioned tone that I would otherwise never have said in real life. To shake off the weird feeling, I went out and had a smoke. The afternoon sun outside brought back the sense of normality, and I got on with the rest of the day without further incident. But that wasn't the end. About a fortnight later, I had the same dream. The busy market, the mad shaman, her hot, disgusting breath on my cheek, and the same sensual voice saying,
Don't go. You'll be happy with me.
Had I not saw the face already that resembled more of a drowned victim, the voice was so seductive and sexy that I would have just said, okay. I could break away from it once again by yelling in that strangely old-fashioned manner. I got up and found myself soaked with a cold sweat. Once again, to get away from the dirty feeling, I went out. It was 7 a.m, and I had a smoke, watching the world outside was gearing up to start another day as usual. About 10 minutes of that calmed me down enough, and I headed back to my room to catch some more sleep. But I stopped myself in the middle on the stairs leading down to my room. It felt like I was trying to walk through a cold body of water charged with electricity. Creepy chill and resistance in the air, followed by stinging sensation all over me, as if hundreds of needles were ripping me through. I panicked. All my instinct screamed that I should turn back and run away. But the next moment I also felt I mustn't run away. This thing I wouldn't be able to run away from. The only way was to face it now and fight off. I walked down one step at a time against a sense of resistance and opened up the door to my room with glaring eyes. How could I put it into words what I felt then? It wasn't that there was something to see, but the whole room was dizzily swirling with a mad energy of cold, stinging vortex. It wasn't my room anymore. Soon I sensed a presence at one corner of my room, full of angry resentment. The deadly fury was so intense that there was no room for a context or reasoning. It was scary. But I had no room to step back either, if I were to save my sanity, or indeed my very self. What I did next I still could not explain. It was not what I planned or figured out to do, but I planted my feet firmly on the ground and started shouting to the insolence presence drawn out from somewhere deep in my belly, a much deeper and muscular voice than my own. I don't remember all the things I said, but the part I remember went like,
I see your pain and resentment. However, it is only going to further tangle your karma by harming yet another person. It is time to move on. Go where you belong.
I think I carried on that manner for good 5 minutes. I felt the resistance and electric charge in the air thin out gradually. I walked in and set myself on the desk chair, lighted my cigarette, and carried on talking to and persuade the presence for another 5 minutes or so. Again, none of it was from my usual self. At the end of it, it was gone, leaving no trace, as if none of it had ever happened. I myself returned to normal too,
nonchalantly turning on the computer and logging onto the chatting as if the scary drama I just experienced didn't happen at all. And then I went back to bed and slept soundly a few more hours. It was only when I got up later in the day that I realized how weird and unrealistic the whole thing really was. That presence, a concentrated force of anger, and how I behaved like a totally different person to fight it off, and how the situation just went away in the end like an ice cube melting into water. I was taken by the urgency to record the experience down and possibly communicate it to others. It was time before the World Wide Web, and all we had was the basic message board and chatting rooms on regional network. But anyway, posted my account on the horror-themed message board. A few days later, I received an email from a stranger. It read, "Your account sounds like the same shaman ghost I've been after for a year. Do be careful because she's very dangerous. Let me know if you need any help from me." It sounded earnest, but then as now, there were all sorts of phony characters on the network, and I didn't take him seriously. I just replied that I seemed to have managed to vanish it already. I was back in my normal life, practiced my guitar, met friends for drink, recorded demo tapes. The memory of the shaman ghost was still clear, but gradually lost its edge, and I almost thought it might have been all just an unusual nightmare. But another email I received a month later made it all so real again. It was from the same guy from the last time. "I caught that ghost near Karak Market. I believe you have nothing more to worry anymore," it read. I don't know how one could court a ghost and have no proof if that strange guy's claim be true or not. But the thing was, my room at the time was indeed right next to Karak Market, and I didn't mention my whereabouts in my previous account at all. The whole thing is still shrouded with mystery. Who was that shaman ghost? What was her goal of seducing me? And who was that made me fight the ghost off, speaking the things I didn't think I had any understanding, in the voice so much deeper and powerful than my own? Since that day, my singing voice got indeed a bit more opened up and deeper. And lastly, who was that guy that claimed to have caught that ghost? At first, I didn't even understand what was going on. I was 14 then, and was staying up late preparing for the midterm. Past midnight, my older brother, who went to bed before me, suddenly bursted into my room and started searching for something wildly, throwing stuffs out from the drawers.
"Where is it? Where did you hide it? You son of a bitch!"
he shouted. I had no idea what he was talking about or what he was looking for, and just looked at him. His eyes were all bloodshot and had no focus. I still didn't understand what was going on, but I think my instinct rang a red bell first. "I left it under your bed," I said. It wasn't anything I thought through, but just came up. Indeed, brother went to his room, and I went straight to my parents to wake them up. When we went to brother's room, he was still searching for whatever. Dad shook him up and told him to sleep, and he said okay, and went to bed. That night I was so scared that I slept in my parents' room. I witnessed my brother's sleepwalking instance 5-6 times more, and the scariest one went as the following. That evening we played computer game into late night till we got too tired to play on. We lie down on his bed together, and I was about to doze away.
Why did you eat my ice cream?
Brother said abruptly. What ice cream? I said. Brother sat up on bed and shouted,
Give me back my ice cream, you son of a bitch!
I realized he was having yet another episode of somnambulism, so quickly said, I'm sorry, I'll buy you one tomorrow. To that, brother said,
Okay.
And then lied back down. Another bullet dodged. I sighed of relief and closed my eyes. But brother sat up again and shouted,
You're eating mine again, sneaky bastard!
No, I didn't. It's still in the freezer, I said. And brother lied back down again. I was pretty distressed and almost scared, but then I was so tired too, and tried to sleep, hoping that was it. But then, I just felt like I should open my eyes for no reason. I popped them open and saw my brother standing next to bed, staring down on me. If I had a feeble heart, it would have just stopped that moment. I screamed, jumped out, and ran to my parents, turning lights on the way. When we went back to brother, he was still standing there by the bed. In his hand, he was holding a knife. Dad slapped his face to wake him up, and brother said he had no memory of anything. Fortunately, nothing more serious happened so far, but I must say I'm scared of my brother's somnambulism much more than any ghost. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the compilation. Did it include your favorites too? Here, I'd like to make a little announcement that I'd take a month off before starting the 5th year run of Tales from Korea. I briefly mentioned about it at the beginning of 2024, but some of my close people developed some health issues into this year, and it's taking a lot of my thoughts and time just to be available for them. I should like to use this vacation to recharge and prepare into the next run of the channel. My apology to my followers, and I hope you don't forget Tales from Korea meantime. As per usual, please don't forget to leave a comment and thumbs up, and please consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't yet. Also, you are most welcome to browse through 4 year worth of supernatural, crime, and plain bizarre stories on my archive, straight from Korean web communities. If you feel generous enough to make a small donation, I have a Buy Me a Coffee account, or you could also use the Super Thanks function here on YouTube. Once again, I heartily thank you for all your support. I'll come back in the last days of the summer. Enjoy your vacation and keep well.